This isn't just a story about survival. It's about a woman sold on a wooden block in 1867 Texas who thought her nightmare was just beginning. She was bought by a man her people called an enemy, a Comanche warrior who paid in solid gold. But the reason he bought her and what he knew about her past would unravel a secret that could destroy not just her, but his entire nation. What happened in the dust of Fort Griffin wasn't the end of her story. It was the first shot in a war she never even knew she was fighting. The Texas sun didn't just shine, it punished. It baked the dirt of the Fort Griffin town square into a cracked, pale skillet, and Isabella Martinez felt like she was sizzling right on top of it. She stood on a block of splintered wood, the auctioneer's words buzzing in her ears like fat, ugly flies. Just a few months ago, she was the daughter of a rancher. Now she was livestock. "What am I bid for this fine specimen?" the man bellowed, his voice slick with greed. He yanked on the rope around her wrist for emphasis. "Got fire in her, this one. Good for hard work. Or other duties." A wave of leering grins and sick laughter rolled through the crowd of dusty men. Isabella's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to remember the smell of her mother's cooking, the sound of her father's laugh. But the memory was fading, bleached out by the brutal sun and the stench of cheap whiskey and unwashed bodies. A fat man with tobacco juice staining his beard shouted, $50. Isabella knew him. Jeremiah Briggs, a saloon owner whose cruelty was as legendary as his bad aim. A shiver of pure terror went through her. Being bought by Briggs would be a death sentence, just a slower one than a bullet. 60, another voice called out, a weaselly man who ran the local brothel. Her blood ran colder. Each bid was another shovel of dirt on the grave of the girl she used to be. The price crept up, 80, then 85. It was settling on Briggs. His piggy eyes were gleaming, already picturing his new prize. Isabella started praying, a frantic, silent prayer to a God who felt very, very far away. And then a voice cut through the air like a thunderclap. $200. Every single person in that square froze. The murmuring stopped. The laughter died. $200 in gold coin was a fortune. It was more than most of these men made in a year. Heads swiveled, searching for the man who'd throw away that kind of money. Isabella opened her eyes and her breath caught in her throat. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, but he might as well have been on a mountain. He was tall, built like an oak tree, with skin the color of rich earth and long black hair held back by a simple leather band. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were the color of wild honey, and they weren't looking at the auctioneer. They were looking right at her. He was Comanche, an enemy to her people, an enemy to the white settlers, a ghost from the wild lands, a living, breathing nightmare according to every story she'd ever been told. The crowd shifted, a nervous ripple of fear and suspicion. What was a warrior doing here? And why in God's name was he bidding on a Mexican girl? The auctioneer, a man who'd sell his own mother for a profit, actually stammered. I'm not sure we can accept a bid from... The Comanche warrior didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just took one step forward, and the crowd parted for him like the sea. His honey-colored eyes locked onto the auctioneer. "This is an auction," he said, his English perfect, laced with an accent she couldn't place. "I have money. Your money." He pulled a leather pouch from his belt and gave it a slight shake. The sound of gold coins clinking together was deafening in the sudden silence. It was the only sound that mattered on the frontier. Jeremiah Briggs, red-faced and furious, pushed his way forward. "Now see here, we can't let some savage just..." The warrior's gaze slid from the auctioneer to Briggs. He said nothing. He didn't move a muscle. But whatever Briggs saw in those eyes made him choke on his own words and take a clumsy step back. The message was as clear as a knife to the throat. Greed, as it always does, won the day. The auctioneer licked his dry lips. Going once. Going twice. He looked around, but the other men were staring at the ground, at their feet, anywhere but at the Comanche. "Sold to the gentleman for $200. Isabella's knees buckled. Sold. to a man whose people were spoken of in terrified whispers around campfires. Had she escaped one hell only to be dragged into another, even worse one? The warrior moved toward the platform. He didn't walk, he flowed with the silent grace of a panther. He counted the heavy gold coins into the auctioneer's sweaty palm, then turned to her. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. Her, shaking with a fear so deep it felt like it was freezing her bones. Him, with that unreadable expression, those eyes that seemed to see everything. "Come," he said. The single word was a command, not a request. He held out a hand to help her down. She hesitated for only a second. Then she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, his skin warm and calloused, but it was surprisingly gentle. He led her through the crowd, which shrank away from them, the men who had been jeering at her moments before now refusing to meet her eyes. They were afraid of him, deeply afraid. "Wait just a minute," Briggs shouted, finding his courage now that he was surrounded by other townsfolk. "We got rights here. You can't just, The warrior stopped. He turned, slowly, deliberately. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the entire square. "I paid your price. She is mine. By your laws. Do you wish to dispute this legal transaction?" Briggs's face went from red to purple. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. He spat a wad of tobacco into the dust and stalked away. The warrior gave a single, satisfied nod. Then he led her to the edge of town where two horses were waiting, a magnificent paint stallion and a smaller, sturdy mare. He moved with an efficiency that was mesmerizing, checking the mare's saddle, adjusting the stirrups. "My name is Ayana," he said without looking at her. "The white men sometimes call me Nathan. You will ride the mare. She is gentle." Isabella finally found her voice, though it was a dry, cracking whisper. "Where are you taking me?" He paused his work and looked at her directly. For a split second, she saw something flicker in those honey eyes. It wasn't pity, it was something else, something she couldn't name. "Home," he said simply. "You're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign on her tongue. As he helped her onto the mare, 1,000 questions burned in her mind. Had she just traded a cage in a town for a different kind of cage in the wilderness? Or had this fearsome stranger, this man who was supposed to be her enemy, just told her the first truth she'd heard in months? As they rode out of Fort Griffin, leaving the dust and the cruelty behind, she didn't know whether she was riding toward her salvation or her doom. She only knew that her life was no longer her own. It belonged to the silent warrior riding beside her, and his secrets were as vast and as dangerous as the Texas plains stretching out before them. The only sound for hours was the steady rhythm of 4 hooves on hard-packed earth. The sky bled from blue to a fiery orange and deep purple, a beautiful, lonely sunset that made Isabella's heart ache for a home she'd never see again. They rode deeper and deeper into a world that was wild, untamed, and utterly terrifying. She kept stealing glances at the man beside her. Ayana. He rode his stallion as if he were part of the animal, his body moving in perfect sync with the horse. His gaze was never still, constantly scanning the horizon, reading the landscape like a book written in a language she didn't know. He was alert to dangers she couldn't even imagine, and strangely, that vigilance made her feel protected. It was a feeling she thought had died with her father. Just as darkness began to swallow the last of the light, he spoke. "We will stop soon. There is water." She just nodded, her throat too thick with dust and fear to speak. Every muscle screamed in protest. He led them to a small grove of cottonwood trees, a dark green oasis where a narrow creek cut through the land. He dismounted with that same fluid grace and was at her side before she could even think about how to get down. His hands were strong as he lifted her from the saddle, setting her on the ground as if she were made of glass. "Drink," he said, nodding toward the creek. "It is clean." The water was cold and sweet. It felt like life itself pouring down her throat. She splashed it on her face, washing away the grime of the auction block, and when she looked up, Ayana was watching her. He'd already built a small, smokeless fire and was pulling dried meat and hard bread from his saddlebags. "You must eat," he said. "The journey is long." They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the gentle noises of the night. The emptiness of the plains was vast, pressing in on all sides. Finally, she had to know. The question had been screaming in her mind for hours. Why? She whispered, her voice barely carrying over the fire. Why did you buy me? What do you want? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. He stared into the flames, his face a mask of shadows and light. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, thoughtful. 3 moons ago, I had a vision, he said, a dream from the spirits. I saw a woman with hair like a raven's wing and eyes like the deep water of a hidden spring. She was standing on a platform, surrounded by men with evil in their hearts. Isabella stared at him, her food forgotten. He was describing her. The spirits told me this woman would bring healing to my people, he continued, his eyes still on the fire. But they were very clear. She must come of her own free will. She could not be a captive. Healing? Isabella's voice was thin. I'm not a medicine woman. I don't know how to heal anyone. Not that kind of healing. He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her shiver. My people have suffered greatly. The soldiers, the sickness they bring. We have lost many warriors, many children. The women weep, and the old ones fear our ways will be forgotten. We are losing hope. Sometimes hope comes in a form no one expects. He paused, a profound sadness in his eyes. When I saw you on that platform today, I knew. You were the woman from my vision, but the spirits gave me a law. I cannot force you. I could only buy your freedom from those men. I can only offer you a choice, a life with my people, or I will take you wherever you wish to go. North to the white man's forts. South back to what is left of Mexico. The choice must be yours. Tears pricked her eyes. A choice. It was something she hadn't had in so long. But they will hate me. I am Mexican, an outsider, an enemy. Some will, he admitted, his honesty as sharp as a blade. The wounds between our peoples are deep and they bleed still. But others, the wise ones, will judge you on your heart, not your blood. My grandmother, Winona, is the senior woman of our band. She is respected. She is fair. If she accepts you, the others will follow. He held her gaze. And if she does not, I will keep my word. I will take you away. You will be free. She studied his face in the flickering firelight, searching for the trick, the lie. But all she saw was a strange, solemn sincerity. It made no sense. Nothing about this made sense. How do you know my name? She asked suddenly. Isabella Martinez. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by something else. Respect. You were praying, he said softly, on the block. You spoke your name. You prayed to your mother, Maria, and your father, Diego. You asked your God to forgive you if you were about to die. The memory hit her like a physical blow. She had prayed, a desperate, silent litany inside her own head. She hadn't spoken a word aloud. She was sure of it. Her eyes widened in disbelief. You heard my thoughts? Ayana gave a small, sad smile. No, I did not need to. I saw it in your eyes, but I also heard you whisper. The wind carried it. And I understand Spanish. You speak Spanish? Spanish, English, Apache, some French, he said, as if listing things he'd bought at a market. A warrior must know the tongue of both his friends and his enemies. He paused. And sometimes it is hard to tell which is which. A thought struck her, something that had been bothering her since town. Ayana, that is your real name. Nathan is the one that feels wrong, like a costume. For the first time he smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his stoic face, making him look younger, less dangerous. You are very perceptive, Isabella Martinez. My mother gave me the name Ayana. It means eternal blossom. But Nathan is a name the white men can say without spitting. It is a useful mask to wear when walking in their world. Eternal blossom, she repeated softly. It was a beautiful name, a poet's name. It didn't fit the terrifying image of a Comanche warrior. Or maybe it was the only thing that truly did. As the fire burned low, He laid out two thick blankets, one for her and one for himself, on opposite sides of the dying embers. A clear, unspoken promise of safety. "Sleep," he said. "We ride at dawn." She wrapped herself in the blanket, the wool soft and warm against her skin. She looked up at the billion stars scattered across the black velvet sky, more stars than she had ever seen. Just this morning she had been property, waiting to be brutalized and broken. Now she was. Something else. A guest, a prophecy, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. "Ayana," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes." His voice was a low rumble from the other side of the fire. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "For today, whatever happens. Thank you." There was a long silence, and then he spoke, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "Sleep well, Isabella Martinez. The spirits do not send visions by accident. Your path has just begun." She closed her eyes, but her mind was racing. He said he saw a woman with her face in a vision. But what if it wasn't a vision at all? What if he knew exactly who she was long before he ever walked into that dusty town square? The thought sent a new kind of chill down her spine, one that had nothing to do with the night air. They arrived at the Comanche winter camp 2 days later, and it was nothing like the whispered horror stories. It wasn't a place of savagery, but a thriving community nestled in a valley sheltered by rolling hills. Dozens of painted teepees stood against the sky, smoke curling from their peaks. The air was filled with the sounds of life, children laughing, women singing, the distant nickering of horses. But as they rode down into the valley, a silence fell over the camp. Every face turned toward them. Work stopped. Laughter died. They weren't just looking at Ayana, their returning warrior. They were staring at her, at the stranger, the outsider. "They knew we were coming," Ayana said quietly. "Word travels fast." He was right. On the ridge above, she saw warriors on horseback, their faces painted, their eyes hard. They were an honor guard or a firing squad. She couldn't tell which. "Show no fear," Ayana murmured, so low only she could hear. "But show respect. Courage is the currency of my people." She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and prayed her trembling knees wouldn't give out. They rode toward the largest teepee at the center of the camp, its hide painted with soaring eagles and charging buffalo. As they dismounted, an old woman emerged. She was ancient, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her gray hair braided with silver and turquoise. But her eyes were as sharp and black as obsidian chips, and they missed nothing. She carried herself like a queen. This had to be Winona. "Grandmother," Ayana said, speaking in English for Isabella's sake, "I have brought the woman from my vision." Winona's piercing gaze settled on Isabella. She spoke in rapid, guttural Comanche, her tone sharp and questioning. Ayana replied respectfully but firmly. The exchange was a tense back and forth, a verbal duel, and Isabella was the prize, or the problem, being debated. Finally, the old woman stepped forward, her eyes boring into Isabella's. "I am Winona," she said, her English heavily accented but clear. "My grandson says the spirits sent you to heal our people. Is this what you believe?" The entire camp was watching, waiting. Isabella's answer would decide her fate. "I believe," Isabella said, her voice steadier than she felt, "that my life was saved by your grandson. That was not the work of evil spirits. What comes next is a path I cannot see. I only know I am grateful to be standing here and not in that town." Winona studied her for a long, silent moment. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "You do not speak like a frightened mouse. This is good." She turned and addressed the crowd in Comanche. Whatever she said seemed to pacify them, at least for now. Murmurs of acceptance and some of doubt rippled through the onlookers. But just as Winona beckoned her toward the teepee, a young woman pushed through the crowd, blocking their path. She was stunningly beautiful, her dress adorned with intricate beadwork, her black hair in elaborate braids, and her eyes were blazing with pure, undiluted hatred. All of it directed at Isabella. She spoke in sharp, angry Comanche to Ayana, gesturing dismissively toward Isabella. Ayana's reply was short and firm, but it only seemed to fuel the woman's rage. She turned her venomous glare on Isabella and spat out in broken English, "I am Casina. I am wife-to-be of Ayana. You, not welcome here." Isabella felt the blood rush to her cheeks. Betrothed? Ayana was betrothed? The man who had spoken of visions and choices, who had looked at her with an intensity that made her chest ache, was promised to another woman. A fierce, beautiful woman who now looked like she wanted to kill her. "Casina!" Winona's voice was like the crack of a whip. She said something sharp in their language, and the younger woman, though her eyes still shot daggers, stepped aside. Inside Winona's teepee, a fire burned warmly. Buffalo robes covered the ground, and the air smelled of cedar and sage. Winona handed Isabella a bowl of savory stew. As she ate, Ayana recounted his vision for his grandmother. When he finished, Winona was silent for a long time. Then she looked at Isabella. "This healing my grandson speaks of, I have seen no sign of it, but I have seen a sickness. It came with the last moon. It takes the children first. A fever, then a cough, then they cannot breathe. Our medicines do not touch it." Isabella's heart clenched. Sickness. That's what he meant by suffering. "Many believe it is a curse," Winona said, her dark eyes watching Isabella's every reaction. "Brought by outsiders. Some will look at you and see the source of this curse." Before Isabella could process this, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, panicked cries. A woman ran into the teepee, her face streaked with tears, speaking frantically to Winona. Winona stood, her face grim. "Another has fallen ill. Casina's little sister." They rushed outside. A small crowd had gathered around another teepee. Inside, a little girl, no older than 5, was struggling for every breath, her small body convulsing with a terrible rasping cough. Her skin was hot to the touch. Casina was kneeling beside her, weeping. But when she saw Isabella, her grief twisted into fury. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "This is your fault. You brought this death to our camp." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The crowd murmured, their faces turning from sympathy to suspicion. They were a people steeped in belief of spirits and omens. The arrival of a stranger, followed by more sickness, it was a simple, terrifying math. "I did nothing," Isabella said, her voice shaking. "She is a witch," Casina screamed. "A Mexican witch sent by the white men to poison us." Ayana stepped forward, placing himself between Isabella and the angry crowd. "She is the woman from my vision. She is here to help us." "She helps by killing our children?" someone shouted from the back. The mood was turning ugly, fast. Winona was trying to calm the crowd, but fear was a wildfire, and Casina was fanning the flames. Isabella looked at the sick child, and a memory sparked. A horrible memory from 2 years ago on her father's ranch. A sickness had swept through their calves. A strange fever, a rasping cough that stole their breath. It had been devastating. Her father had worked with an old vaquero who knew herbs, who had an old remedy. "The creek," Isabella said suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise. "The plants that grow near the water. Is there one with small yellow flowers and leaves shaped like arrowheads?" Winona looked at her, surprised. "Yes, we call it bitter root. It is a poison. It kills animals that eat it." "No," Isabella insisted, her mind racing. "It's not poison. Not if you prepare it correctly. My father, he used it for sick cattle. You have to boil the root, not the leaves, and mix the water with honey." Casina laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She wants to feed my sister poison. I told you she was a witch." "It's not poison," Isabella pleaded, looking at Ayana, then at Winona. "It's a cure. I've seen it work." Winona looked from Isabella's desperate face to the gasping child. The girl was fading. They were losing her. The old woman's own medicine had failed. She was faced with an impossible choice. Trust the old ways that were no longer working, or trust the strange outsider their warrior had brought among them. "If you are wrong," Winona said, her voice heavy with the weight of her decision, "your life is forfeit. The people will demand it. Do you understand?" Isabella looked at the little girl, her tiny chest rattling with each failed breath. She thought of the calves on her father's ranch, dying in the same terrible way. She had to try. "I understand," she said. The entire camp watched as Isabella, guided by a reluctant Ayana, gathered the poison root. They watched as she prepared it exactly as she remembered, boiling it over a fire, the strange, bitter smell filling the air. Casina stood outside the teepee, her arms crossed, her face a mask of triumphant fury, waiting for Isabella to fail, waiting to prove she was a murderer. Isabella knelt beside the little girl, the warm honey-sweetened liquid in a small clay cup. The child was barely conscious. "Her spirit is already walking the long path," a woman whispered from the doorway. Isabella gently tilted the cup to the girl's lips, letting a few drops trickle into her mouth. The girl coughed weakly. Isabella tried again, a little more. The girl swallowed, and then they waited. Hours passed. The camp was silent, holding its breath. Isabella never left the child's side, wiping her brow with cool water, whispering soothing words in Spanish she didn't even realize she was speaking. Ayana stood guard at the teepee entrance, his hand never far from the knife at his belt, watching the shadows for any threat. Just before dawn, the little girl's breathing began to change. The terrible rasping sound lessened. It grew deeper, steadier. A few minutes later, her eyes fluttered open. She looked around, confused, and then her gaze settled on Casina. "Sister?" she whispered, her voice weak but clear. A collective gasp went through the people gathered outside. Casina pushed her way in, her face a storm of disbelief and confusion. She saw her sister awake, breathing. Isabella hadn't brought a curse. She had brought a miracle. But as the camp began to celebrate, as people looked at Isabella with awe instead of suspicion, she saw the expression on Casina's face. It wasn't relief. It wasn't gratitude. It was pure, unadulterated rage. Isabella hadn't just saved her sister's life. She had taken something from Casina that was far more precious, her place at Ayana's side. She had won the people's respect, a respect Casina felt was hers by right. And Isabella knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this wasn't over. Casina wouldn't stop until she was gone, or dead. The sickness in the camp might be cured, but a new poison had just taken root. The next few weeks were a blur. Isabella, guided by Winona, treated the other sick children, and one by one they recovered. The camp that had looked at her with suspicion now saw her as a savior. They called her the healer, a name spoken with reverence. Women brought her small gifts, a beaded pouch, a well-made moccasin. Children who had once hidden from her now followed her around, their dark eyes wide with wonder. She was no longer an outsider. She was one of them. She found a rhythm in the daily life of the camp. She learned to tan hides until they were butter soft, to cook over an open fire, to speak the musical Comanche language. And with every passing day, the bond between her and Ayana deepened. They rarely spoke of what was growing between them, but it was there, a silent current in the glances they shared across the fire, in the way he would appear at her side just when she needed help lifting something heavy, in the way his presence made her feel both completely safe and dangerously alive. But Casina's shadow was always there. The woman's hatred had not softened with her sister's recovery. It had sharpened into a razor's edge. She watched Isabella with a cold, calculating fury, her smile a thin, poisonous line. She never missed an opportunity for a subtle jab, a whispered insult in Comanche, just loud enough for Isabella to hear. One evening, as the sun set, Ayana found Isabella by the creek, washing clay pots. "You have brought hope back to our people," he said, his voice a low murmur. "My vision was true." "It was my father's knowledge, not mine," she said, not looking up from her work. "I was just lucky enough to remember it." "It was not luck," he said, moving closer. "It was destiny. The spirits chose you." He hesitated, then his next words came out in a rush. "Isabella, the betrothal between myself and Casina. It was an arrangement made by our families when we were children. My heart was never in it." Isabella's hands stilled in the water. She looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Ayana." "My heart," he said, his honey-colored eyes burning with an emotion he could no longer hide, "is with the healer." Before she could answer, before she could breathe, a shout came from the edge of the camp. A warrior was pointing toward the hills. "Riders are coming!" But they weren't warriors. A lone figure was stumbling toward them, a man in tattered white man's clothes, his face bloody and bruised. Two of Ayana's warriors intercepted him, dragging him into the center of the camp. Isabella gasped. Even beneath the blood and dirt, she recognized him. It was Thomas Briggs, the son of the man who had tried to buy her. The warriors threw him at Winona's feet. "We found him watching the camp," one of them reported. "He had a book with drawings of our defenses. A spy." The word shot through the crowd like an arrow. Thomas Briggs coughed, spitting blood onto the dirt. He lifted his head and his swollen eyes found Isabella. A cruel, broken smile twisted his lips. "Well, well," he wheezed. "Look at you, playing Indian princess. My father is going to be very interested to hear where you've been hiding." He laughed, a gurgling, painful sound. "He's not just a saloon owner, you know. He has friends, important friends, in the cavalry." The blood drained from Isabella's face. "He sent me to find this camp," Thomas continued, his voice dripping with malice. "The army is paying good money for the location of hostile camps. They're planning a winter campaign. Wipe everyone out before the snow falls. Men, women, children. It don't matter to them." A murderous rage swept through the Comanche warriors. They surged forward, weapons drawn, their voices rising in a terrifying cry for justice. This man wasn't just a spy, he was a harbinger of death, the scout for an army that would slaughter them all. "Wait!" Isabella cried out, stepping forward without thinking. All eyes turned to her. "This man is an enemy," a grim-faced warrior said. "He has brought a death sentence to our door. He must die." "Killing him won't stop the soldiers," Isabella argued, her mind racing. "They'll just send another scout. But if he's alive, we can use him." Thomas Briggs laughed again. "Use me how, you little—" Isabella ignored him, her eyes locked on Winona and Ayana. "He thinks he's found your camp, your main camp. What if we let him escape? What if he goes back and tells his father and the cavalry exactly what we want them to hear? That you're weak, that your warriors are few, that you're camped in the open valley." Ayana's eyes lit up with understanding. "And we will be waiting for them somewhere else, in the narrow canyon to the east, a place where 100 soldiers are no match for 20 of our warriors." It was a brilliant, daring plan, a trap. But Cassina stepped out of the crowd, her face a mask of scorn. "You would trust the word of this white man? You would risk the lives of our entire people on a trick suggested by an outsider? She is one of them. How do we know this isn't her plan to betray us all?" The crowd, which had been nodding in agreement with Ayana, now hesitated. The seeds of doubt were sown once more. Was Isabella truly one of them? Or was her loyalty as thin as her foreign skin? Winona looked at Isabella, her old eyes weighing the fate of her people. "The risk is great. If your plan fails, we will all be slaughtered." "The greater risk is to do nothing," Isabella pleaded. "They are coming. He told you. At least this way, we choose the battlefield. We have a chance." The decision hung in the balance. The life of the spy, the fate of the trap, and the very survival of the Comanche band rested on one question. Could they trust her? Suddenly, Thomas Briggs began to laugh, a high, unhinged sound. "You're all fools," he gasped, looking straight at Isabella. "You think this is about land? About some winter campaign? You have no idea what my father really wants." "What are you talking about?" Ayana demanded, grabbing him by the front of his shirt. "It's not the camp he wants," Thomas sneered, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "It's her. He's wanted her from the beginning." A confused silence fell over the camp. "Why?" Isabella whispered. "Why me?" Thomas Briggs's eyes gleamed with a feverish light. "Because of what your father found, and what he hid. My father tortured your old ranch hand before he died. The old man talked. He told us everything." He paused for dramatic effect, savoring the moment. "He told us your father didn't just die of a broken heart after they took his land," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone could hear. "My father killed him because your father, Diego Martinez, found silver on that land, a whole mountain of it. And just before he died, He told the ranch hand he'd hidden the map where no one would ever find it. Somewhere safe. Somewhere he knew his daughter would keep with her always. He stared right at Isabella, at the simple beaded bracelet she wore on her wrist, the one her mother had made for her as a little girl, the one she had never ever taken off. The map, Thomas Briggs hissed, a triumphant broken grin spreading across his face, isn't on a piece of paper. It's in the beads, right there on your wrist. Every eye in the camp turned to the bracelet, to the intricate pattern of colored beads that was, suddenly, the most dangerous thing in all of Texas. Isabella was no longer a healer, no longer a refugee. She was a treasure map, and the men who had murdered her father were coming to get her. They weren't just bringing a patrol, they were bringing an army. The revelation hit the camp like a lightning strike. Isabella stared at the bracelet on her wrist, the familiar, comforting weight of it suddenly feeling like a lead shackle. All this time she had been carrying her own death warrant, a secret worth more than gold, woven into the simple beads her mother had strung for her. Her father hadn't died of grief. He'd been murdered. For this, the knowledge was a cold, hard stone in her gut. The men who destroyed her life weren't just greedy creditors. They were killers, and they were coming back to finish the job. Ayana's hand closed over hers, his fingers gently covering the bracelet, as if to shield it from the hungry eyes of the world. "He will not touch you," he swore, his voice a low growl of protective fury. But the situation had changed drastically. It was no longer a simple military raid they faced. Jeremiah Briggs wanted the silver, and he would use the cavalry to clear the way, to wipe out anyone who stood between him and the mine. The Comanche were just an obstacle to be removed. "Her plan is still our best chance," Ayana said, his voice ringing with authority as he addressed Winona and the other warriors. "Now more than ever, we set the trap in the canyon. We let this snake," he gestured to Thomas, "go back and lead them into it." But Cassina saw her opening. "And what happens after?" "Gerori," she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. "After we fight their battle for them? The white men will not stop coming for the silver. As long as she is here," she pointed a finger at Isabella, "she brings this plague of greed down upon us. She is a danger to us all. The only way to be safe is to give her to them." A few of the more fearful members of the band murmured in agreement. Cassina was preying on their deepest anxieties. Why should they die to protect this outsider and her secret fortune? "We do not sacrifice the innocent to save ourselves," Winona's voice boomed, silencing the dissent. "That is the way of the white man, not of the people. She is under our protection. She has healed our children. She is one of us now. We will fight for her as we would fight for any of our own." The old woman's gaze was iron. The debate was over. The plan was set in motion. They would bloody Thomas Briggs up a bit more, make his escape look believable. He would be allowed to steal a horse in the dead of night and ride back to his father with the false information. As two warriors dragged a protesting Thomas to a secluded teepee, Isabella felt a tug on her sleeve. It was Cassina. Her face, for the first time, was not filled with hatred. It was a mask of cold, hard calculation. "You have won," Cassina said quietly, her English surprisingly fluent when she wasn't putting on a show. "You have bewitched them all. The old woman, the warriors, him." She didn't need to say Ayana's name. "But do not think this is over. When the soldiers come, when our men are dying in that canyon because of your treasure, they will remember my warning. They will turn on you." "This isn't what I wanted," Isabella whispered. "I never knew about the silver." "It does not matter what you wanted," Cassina hissed. "You are a storm that has come to our lands, and you will destroy everything you touch." She turned and walked away, her back straight and proud, leaving Isabella feeling colder than ever. That night the camp was alive with a tense, nervous energy. Warriors sharpened their blades, checked their bowstrings, and painted their faces for the battle to come. The women packed supplies, preparing to move the main camp to a hidden, safer location while the warriors went to the canyon. In the chaos, Isabella found a moment alone with Ayana near the horse pens. The moon was high and cold, casting long shadows across the ground. "You should not have to fight for me," she said, her voice thick with guilt. "This is my burden, my father's secret." "Your father's secret is now our people's war," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Do you not see? The Silver Mountain is on land that was stolen from us long before it was stolen from your father. We are not just fighting for you, Isabella. We are fighting for our home." He reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "And I am fighting for you." The sincerity in his eyes was overwhelming. He leaned in, and for a breathless moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. But a sudden shout from across the camp shattered the spell. "The prisoner! He's gone! The spy has escaped!" Panic erupted. Warriors ran from their teepees, grabbing their weapons. Had he escaped too early? Was the plan ruined? Ayanna was instantly in command. "Search the perimeter. He cannot have gone far." But a young boy came running toward them, his eyes wide with fear. "I saw him!" he cried, pointing toward the creek. "Cassina! She was with him. She cut his ropes. She showed him where the horses were tethered." The world seemed to stop. Cassina. It was her final, ultimate betrayal. She hadn't just argued against the plan. She had actively sabotaged it. She had freed their enemy. She must have made a deal. Isabella's life, the map on her wrist, in exchange for her own safety. Perhaps even a reward from Briggs. She had sold them all out. "She would not do that," a warrior said, shaking his head in disbelief. Cassina was the daughter of a great chief, betrothed to their finest warrior. "She did," the boy insisted. "I saw her give him a knife." And then they heard it, the sound of a horse galloping hard and fast, fading into the night. Thomas Briggs was gone, and he wasn't just carrying false information anymore. He was carrying the truth. Cassina would have told him everything, about the trap in the canyon, about the real location of the camp, about their numbers, their plans. She had just handed Jeremiah Briggs and the United States Cavalry the key to their complete and total annihilation. The stunned silence was broken by Ayanna's voice. No longer warm, no longer gentle. It was cold and hard as forged steel. "She is a traitor. She has sided with our enemies. She has sentenced us all to death." He turned to his most trusted warriors. "They ride for Fort Griffin. We ride now. We must catch them before they reach the soldiers." But Isabella knew it was almost impossible. Cassina knew the land. She would guide Thomas through secret paths. They had a huge head start. The trap had not just failed, it had been turned against them. The hunters had just become the hunted. And somewhere out there in the darkness, two traitors were riding to seal their doom, one driven by greed, the other by a jealousy so vast and poisonous it would see her own people slaughtered just to destroy a rival. The battle for the Silver Mountain was about to begin, and the Comanche were walking right into a massacre. There was no time for grief, no time for shock. There was only the cold, hard reality of the coming dawn. Ayanna moved through the camp like a storm, his face carved from stone. He was no longer the gentle man who spoke of visions. He was a war chief, and his people were on the brink of extinction. "We cannot stay here," he announced to the gathered elders. "Cassina knows this location. She will lead them right to us. We move the camp now. All women, children, and elders will travel north to the broken lands. It is hard country. The soldiers' horses cannot follow easily." "And the warriors?" Winona asked, her voice calm despite the chaos. "We do not run," Ayanna said, his eyes blazing in the firelight. "We still have one advantage. They think we do not know about the betrayal. They will come to the canyon, expecting to find us waiting in a foolish trap. They will be arrogant. They will be careless." Isabella's mind, sharpened by fear, saw the shape of his new plan. "They'll be expecting an ambush," she said, thinking aloud, "so you won't give them one." Ayanna looked at her, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. "Exactly. They will ride into the canyon, looking up at the ridges for our warriors. But we will not be on the ridges." He slammed his fist on a map drawn in the dirt. "We will be behind them. We will let them pass through the canyon, and then we will seal it, at both ends. They will be the ones in the trap." It was a plan of breathtaking audacity. It relied on speed, stealth, and the enemy's own arrogance. But it was their only chance. As the camp dissolved into a frantic, organized chaos of packing and preparation, Winona pulled Isabella aside. The old woman's eyes were filled with a deep, ancient sadness. "Cassina was my granddaughter. I helped raise her. Now her name will be a curse on our lips for generations." She placed a hand on Isabella's arm. "This is not your fault, child. The poison was in her heart long before you arrived. You only gave it a name." The warriors prepared to ride. They were hopelessly outnumbered, but there was no fear on their faces, only a grim, cold determination. As Ayana mounted his paint stallion, he paused and looked down at Isabella. "I will return," he said. It wasn't a promise of hope. It was a statement of fact. "Let me come with you," she pleaded. "I can help. I can shoot." He shook his head. "Your place is with the others. You must help Winona lead them to safety. If we fall, you must survive. You must take the others and run. Go north, keep going, and never look back." He pressed a leather pouch into her hand. It was heavy with gold coins. "The gold I paid for you. If the worst happens, use it to build a new life." He turned his horse to leave, but Isabella grabbed his hand. "Ayana, my father did not just leave me a map. He taught me how to think. The cavalry. They follow bugle calls. One sound for advance, one for retreat, one for charge. If you can capture their bugler, you can command their army." Ayana stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "A healer," he said softly. "A strategist. The spirits truly did know what they were doing." He squeezed her hand one last time. "Survive, Isabella Martinez." Then he was gone, leading his small band of warriors into the pre-dawn darkness, riding toward a battle they had no right to win. Isabella turned and joined the exodus of the helpless, a long, sorrowful train of women, children, and old men heading north into the wilderness. Her heart was a cold lump of ice in her chest. She was running away while the man she loved was riding toward his death. The battle happened 2 days later. Ayana's warriors, moving like ghosts through the land, got into position at the far end of the canyon long before the cavalry arrived. They watched as the soldiers, led by a confident Jeremiah Briggs and a nervous Thomas, rode into the narrow passage. They saw Cassina, riding near the front, pointing up at the ridges where she had promised Briggs the Comanche would be waiting. The soldiers were relaxed, laughing, anticipating an easy slaughter. When the entire column was inside, Ayana gave the signal. The warriors at the entrance triggered a massive rock slide, sealing the way they had come. Boulders the size of horses crashed down, blocking the path completely. The cavalry column plunged into chaos. Before they could recover, Ayana's main force attacked from the rear, sealing the other end of the trap. The soldiers were caught, packed together in the narrow canyon, a perfect target. Arrows rained down. Warriors who seemed to materialize from the very rock swarmed them. It was a massacre, but not the one Briggs had planned. In the confusion, Ayana himself fought his way to the cavalry's bugler, a terrified young man who dropped his instrument and surrendered immediately. Ayana put the bugle to his own lips. He didn't know the army's calls, but he knew the sound of command. He blew one long, clear, piercing note. To the panicked soldiers, trapped and surrounded, it sounded like a signal they couldn't understand. A new order. Some thought it was a retreat, others a rally. It only added to their confusion, shattering what was left of their command structure. Jeremiah Briggs, seeing his dreams of silver turning to dust and blood, tried to fight his way out. He was met by a Comanche warrior whose face was a mask of cold fury. The two men fought, but Briggs was no match for a warrior defending his home. By the time the sun began to set, the canyon was silent. The battle was over. The Comanche had won an impossible victory. They found Cassina hiding among the rocks, her fine dress torn, her face white with terror. She had seen the tide turn and had tried to flee. The warriors brought her before Ayana. She fell to her knees, begging, pleading. Ayana looked down at her, not with hatred, but with a profound, empty sadness. "You have betrayed your own blood," he said, his voice flat. "You are no longer one of the people. There is no place for you here." They did not kill her. They gave her a fate far worse. They took her horse, her weapons, her water. They pointed her east, toward the white man's world she had chosen. They left her to walk alone, an outcast from her own tribe, forever banished, to survive or die on her own. They took only 2 prisoners alive, Thomas Briggs and his father Jeremiah. When Ayana and his warriors returned to the new camp, they were greeted not with a celebration, but with a deep, solemn relief. Isabella ran to him, and he slid from his horse and wrapped her in his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. They were both alive. That was all that mattered. The next day, the entire band gathered for judgment. Jeremiah and Thomas Briggs were tied to a post in the center of the camp. "They murdered my father," Isabella said, her voice shaking but clear as she stood before the council. "They tried to slaughter all of you to feed their own greed. They deserve to die." A low growl of agreement went through the warriors. "But," she continued, "if you kill them, more soldiers will come, an endless wave of them, seeking revenge. You have won a battle, but you cannot win that war." She took a deep breath. "There is another kind of justice." She walked over to Jeremiah Briggs, whose eyes were wide with terror. She ripped the beaded bracelet from her own wrist. "This is what you want," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "This is what you killed for." She held it up for all to see. Then, before anyone could stop her, she threw it into the heart of the largest campfire. The sinew threads sizzled and snapped. The beads, the secret of the Silver Mountain, scattered and melted in the intense heat. The map was gone. Forever. Jeremiah Briggs let out a howl of pure animalistic despair. His dream, his fortune, had just turned to smoke and ash. "Now you have nothing," Isabella told him, her eyes cold. "Your life is worthless. Your greed has cost you everything." She turned back to Ayanna and Winona. "Let them go. Let them return to their world with nothing but their shame. Let them be a message to the others. The Silver Mountain is a ghost. There is nothing here for you but death." It was a judgment more clever and more cruel than any blade. To let a man like Briggs live, knowing he had lost an unimaginable fortune, was a torture that would last the rest of his life. They were set free, and they stumbled away into the wilderness, broken men. In the quiet aftermath, Isabella finally felt at home. She had faced death, betrayal, and war. She had not only survived, she had become someone new, stronger, wiser. She stood with Ayanna and Winona, watching the last of the sun's rays paint the sky. "The spirits told me you would bring healing," Ayanna said softly, taking her hand. "You saved our children. You gave us a plan to defeat our enemies. And you destroyed the greed that would have poisoned this land. My vision was true." Isabella leaned her head against his shoulder. "This is my home now," she said. "These are my people." She had been sold on a wooden block, a piece of property, but in the heart of the wild Texas frontier, among a people she had been taught to fear, she had found not just her freedom, but her destiny. She was Isabella Martinez of the Comanche, and she was finally home. Isabella's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest enemies can become our truest family, and that home isn't a place you're from, but a place where you're finally understood. She faced impossible odds and didn't just survive. She became a leader and a legend. If her journey from victim to victor moved you, and if you believe in the power of courage to change the world, do us a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. We've got so many more stories like this to share, and we'd be honored to have you join our community. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.